She's ecstatic.
You want me to set him down there?
What did you do?
Most of my career, I did some consulting, and then I started a few small software companies.
What retail?
I worked for a department store in Richmond, Virginia for a long time, and then I worked for
When you play at supple?
Yeah.
Not yet. They have to play. He's got to play his round today or yesterday. I guess it was yesterday. So I assume did he win?
I don't know.
Oh, okay. I have to play the winner of that match.
and then I became a retail consultant. And the guys that started a predictive analytics software companies.
Wow. You moved around.
Yeah, I did all kinds of stuff.
Well, I hope this will be a good move for you.
Well, I think so. Like I said, I've been down here for the last couple of years, more or less full time, but it's different. My wife's got here now. Just the sense that this is where she lives also is a good feeling.
Our kids are going through this now with a move. My son is a surgeon. He got a job that he thinks will be better for his lifestyle. They have a 15-year-old.
Well, that's what.
My daughter was the same way when we moved to Charlotte. She said she told me what it was. I couldn't remember it.
Well, you know, so Bess is staying in Cincinnati until Anne finishes high school. Because it was such a difficult, she got very depressed. Her friends are there, she's in the 10th grade.
Well, that's a tough time.
Yeah.
Our son was a rising senior, so he stayed a year.
And then the little one,
For 3 years in high school in Charlotte.
did she adjust?
I would say that it was not really. She had a couple of friends, that was about it. And
You know, it's wonderful. Yeah.
Some point,
You know, some kids do. You know, just naturally.
it was a tough move. Very difficult.
Well, anyway, it splits up Anna, Bess and Anna. But it's been so traumatic. So when you said that, I thought,
Yeah, I understand. It can be a tough deal.
yeah. Well, I hope that this will be, what is this? Oh, this is the, you have to take continuing education, and this is my certificate. You're going to have to take
Does John do this?
Yes,
Okay, he told me about that
Yes.
last month when I was talking to him.
the first one I had to take was very tough. So just,
He said it's 6 hours the first one.
yes, it seemed, well, and we also had to go to the county
Timing is everything.
offices, which are way in Charleston. I mean, I'll never forget it, we were there all day. So just, well, maybe you can do it.
Well, you know,
Do we have a time for the meeting Monday?
Yeah. No, you're
10 o'clock Monday.
How long do you think it'll be?
I think it'd be fun. You know, that's how I'm looking at it anyway.
Okay, that's good.
We couldn't do it earlier.
This is the,
Well, actually,
I came to the town council
That's
meeting
fine.
yesterday. And he was either here or here one yesterday. I'm John Moffitt. I met you in John Taylor's office.
hi, Gail Messerman, good to see you. Good.
Well, you got Ways and Means coming in at 2 o'clock, too.
Yeah, do you have your?
It's gonna be here.
Do you have an agenda? Yeah.
9 o'clock Monday.
Everybody has one?
10 o'clock. 10 o'clock.
10 o'clock. Unless you, if you want to make it early, that's fine. We can do it, but you got everybody else.
Yeah, you'd have to clear it.
No, this is not what it's been.
I don't think you want to do that. I mean,
So this
you
is,
never know how many people are going to show up for Ways and Means, and you know you got a whole crowd of people attending this, or want to anyway, to make their voices heard.
John, which turns this off? That's all? How do I know?
Patron may control it.
Okay. All right.
How are you? So I have some classes I have to take with you. Is that true? Okay, you're gonna let me know. You can tell me.
I told them they were delightful and you served donuts.
I'd like to call to order the March 6, 2019 regular meeting of the Keogh Island Planning Commission. Oh, same problem as last time. Hello?
This is on.
They,
If the red light's not on, it's not on.
Okay, perfect.
oh, where?
This is on.
Thank you. As I said, I would like to call to order the March 6, 2019 regular meeting of the Keo Island Planning Commission. Could you call the roll, ma'am? Thank you.
Mr. Peterson?
Here.
Mr. Dowdy? Here. Mr. Kelly?
Here.
Mr. Iwan? Mr. Moffett?
Here.
Ms. Messerman?
Here.
Mr. Spencer?
Here.
Thank you. Next item on the agenda is the approval of minutes from our February 6th meeting. Could I have a motion, please?
So moved.
And a
Second.
second? It's been moved and seconded. Any changes? I'll kick it off with a couple I noticed. On the first page, under the roll call, we show Dan Prickett as vice chairman, but he's been moved up to town council liaison, so we'll scratch that name. And under item 4, new business B, Mr. Dowdy made a motion to approve the 2019 Planning Commission meeting schedule. Those are the only two changes I had. We have quite in-depth minutes from last month's meeting. Any other comments or changes?
Fred, I have one typo I'll give to Petra after the meeting. Nothing major.
Okay.
I also have, I'll mention it
You have
after
a-
the meeting, just typos.
A typo? Okay. With those two typos to be corrected, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
And opposed? Thank you, Bill. The next item is for us to go into executive session to receive legal advice from the town attorney regarding the appeals process. Could I have a motion to do that?
So moved.
Second?
And a second. We will now go into executive session. I don't think it'll be very long. Thank you.
I just wanted to make a comment. I think there's been some questions in regards to the agenda packet. Normally what we do is all the material that's going to be discussed today is always online for the anyone interested to print copies. We generally just print a minimal amount, and so we printed more this time, about 25. Fortunately, our large printer is actually down as well. Everything that they're discussing today will be available on the slide, so you'll all have and be able to view the information on the screen. After the meeting, if you like a hard copy, you can let us know. We can print one out for you and come by tomorrow and pick it up later in the afternoon, because again, our large printer is down. Or you'll have the ability to go online after the meeting and view all the materials. They've been up on the website, I believe, since probably Friday. So we do apologize, but we generally print a limited amount, but we will have all the information up on the screen for you to view.
session.
I need a motion to return to regular session.
So moved.
And a
Second.
second. It's been moved and seconded. We received legal advice and we made no decisions during the executive session. I see no old business. New business, we have the Town Council Directive on Flood Mitigation and Sea Level Rise Adaptation. To just kick it off a little bit, we have a subcommittee of Mr. Stenson, Mr. Capelli, and Mr. Dowdy, who are going to be doing the portion of the response from the Planning Commission. They're going to do the legwork. We need to make some amendments to the comprehensive plan, and they will begin doing that work. But right now, I think we're going to get a short presentation.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
just a question.
Yes,
Can
sir.
we introduce our new member?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, that's a good idea, Bill. Andy. John Moffett is our newest member. He was appointed yesterday to complete Dan Prickett's term of office, which ran through 2020. So he'll get a 2-year tryout, and then we'll see if we keep him around. I guess we're going to call on John Leffler to give us
Mr. Leffler will be giving the presentation.
Give it a handout to go along with the presentation.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for inviting me. This is not necessarily planned as a short presentation. We can get through a lot of it, I suppose.
Is that on?
Comprehensive plan.
That's over, right? There you go.
Okay, yeah, that's louder. Okay, well, we'll try to go through this quicker and just skip over a bunch of it, I suppose. As you've heard, we had a subcommittee that worked for 18 months looking at impacts of floods and sea level rise on Kiowa, and came up with a number of recommendations that we'd make. This is what the table of contents looks like. It's over 125 pages or so. I think 144 recommendations are in that. And so let me just point out a few things in here that you as a planning commission might want to pay attention to. Probably the key piece of all this is the section called A Path Forward, in that this summarizes the major thrust of the report and suggests how we should go forward with it. It suggests that there's a recognition of the long-term sea level rise problem on Kiowa, which I'll call an existential threat. You may not want to use that word, but I don't mind using it. Let me also give you a disclaimer. I'm speaking for myself here because the subcommittee disbanded back in September. So if I was to speak for the committee, we would have to reconvene it and come to a consensus about what's being said. So just take that as this is my thoughts on it. The comprehensive plan should commit the town to incorporate at least a consideration of sea level rise in all the major planning decisions. Now, in some cases, they'll be immediately dismissed as not appropriate for that, but it's like a checkbox that should be looked at and decide whether or not a decision being made could be impacted by sea level rise in the long run. Ideally, in cooperation with the other island entities, we need to establish some kind of a mechanism for developing a comprehensive strategy and plans of how we would go about implementing those strategies. That could be the form of some kind of a standing committee that focuses just on sea level rise and flooding for years to come. It could be hiring a resilience specialist, as the report suggests, someone who could just focus on these issues. This won't be a process, make a few plans and complete them in 3 or 5 years and it's over and done with. This will be an ongoing process as for the conceivable future that we need to stay aware of. Not every action that will need to be taken can be done immediately, nor should it be done immediately. And therefore, the committee advocated this adaptive management approach. This means that we set thresholds for actions and trigger points for when we need to take action in those thresholds. For instance, when the parkway out here, if it floods to 12 to 18 inches of water so that it's impassable once a year, well, that's probably an unacceptable threshold. And so you set a trigger point for something like, well, we get 4 inches of flooding on it once a year. And in that case, when we start seeing that on a regular basis, we need to then begin to really implement actions at that time. But until that begins to happen, until you reach the trigger points, you may want to postpone it. The reason for postponing would be, as well as any actions that are taken, would be to maintain flexibility. This whole threat of sea level rise to coastal communities is new. And there's going to be lots of new kinds of technology developed, and there's going to be lots of new information coming out. So what might look like the only way to do it today could be very different 5 years from now. So if possible, you do actions that can be flexible, maybe reversed altogether to try something else. It takes a continual review of the new information coming out and monitoring of all actions which are implemented to see how they're working. And from that, the plans and actions being taken may have to be revised several times over and over again down the line. This is just a strategy for how we need to go about doing these things. We could talk about the flooding challenges, different types of causes of flooding, because it's not a single simple question, but we can move over that. The report goes into the sea level rise scenarios that we decide to adopt compared to Folly Beach, compared to the city of Charleston, which has now raised their scenario level also. We can talk about that sometime. Another section of the report I'll point out for the Planning Commission is how to reference elevations. Since you reviewed lots and lots of documents that will show the construction of roads and buildings and so on, the reference for those elevations are using NGVD 29 or NAVD 88 and all that we could discuss sometime. But for looking at the impacts of flooding, mean high water locally is probably the most meaningful, because beyond that point is when you see water in places where it should not be, and that's problems. Luckily, it's very easy to convert from one to the other. So that could be a major discussion we might have in the task force committee sometime. But it's important to think about what an elevation really means. 6.5 foot road elevation doesn't mean you're 6.5 feet above water. So the meat of the report and the items that probably would go into the comprehensive plan at some position or another comes from this section of the report. For instance, the roads and stormwater management. Certainly long-term functioning of the roads and the stormwater system is essential for the island. Probably is a priority investment. Probably talk about it in transportation. In other cases, things like low impact development, education programs to help property owners understand how they might do things to mitigate some of the flooding that they have, might go into community facilities. The town right now is investing in a project with the College of Charleston through Lucas Hernandez here, who is working on this for the town, developing very high resolution maps. 1 square meter resolution, which is about 25 times better resolution than any of the inundation maps you can pick up online today. So that on a map like this that would show 2 feet above mean high water, if you can make out a single dot on there, that's 1 square meter. So we got very high resolution. At 2 feet, this gives some idea of what it looks like. At 3 feet, the parkway has water on it, and there's a section of it that is between 12 and 18 inches deep. That's not much water to cause that. At 4 feet, it becomes impassable to all but highly specialized vehicles. This, I'm sure, will come into your planning process. Things like the emergency management utilities section of the report. Again, a lot of information, a lot of different types of recommendations, probably fitting under something like community facilities within the comprehensive plan. There's a section on structures, another one on landscaping, another one on regulations. These are all things that the town may be considering in the future. They could all fit into the comprehensive plan and be mentioned there in the comprehensive plan, different locations, everything from natural resources to community facilities, housing, depending on what the particular recommendation is. The beach and dune system is already talked about in the natural resources section, the comprehensive plan. Very, very important. This is our line of defense against flooding all along that side of the island, and it's a very good line of defense. But we have to make sure that we do everything we can to protect those dunes and not compromise them. And so I think the beach management plan can be updated to incorporate concerns about sea level rise into it, with some strategies for addressing that, probably fitting under natural resources and land use sections. The salt marshes actually make up by far the vast majority of the boundaries of the island. They're very vast. There's more salt marshes on Kiowa than there's dry land. And they're very important for protecting us from surges of waves coming in from that direction. So they're important to maintain, but they're the most susceptible area for flooding from the water. Water's going to come in from the marshes long before it comes in from the beach side of the island. And so we suggest that Kiowa sets to work immediately as a priority, developing a comprehensive marsh management plan. Folly Beach has already done this, and it's the first in the state to do so. We don't have all the same problems that Folly has, but we certainly need to develop something like that, and it can be based on the beach management plan as a beginning template for how to go about doing it. But marshes are not easy. Managing the marshes are going to be much more difficult than the beach. They're much more complex and will present some real challenges to us. There's different places where that should fit into the comprehensive plan, but I suggest it's a priority. Groundwater is something we don't think of, but Kiowa is this little piece of land totally surrounded by salt water. All that salt water is seeping in underneath the land, and the fresh water that supports all the vegetation on the island forms a small lens of water that actually is being pushed up by that salt water underneath. The only way we get that fresh water is by precipitation, or in our case, we pump a lot in by irrigation too, which has to be calculated in the equation. So, but anyways, that is somewhat vulnerable. As sea levels rise, it's going to cause saltwater intrusions. It's going to be pushing that water up. I'm told that already there's some places where groundwater is appearing that it's never been before, and it's going to narrow that lens. So we suggest in the report that we go about contracting for a mapping of that freshwater lens and a study of the real groundwater dynamics which are ongoing. And with that information, we can determine whether or not there are policies that might help us protect that fresh water, which is essential for the island that we know. The final section of the report talks about education. The main purpose here is to empower property owners by providing information so they can better understand some of these challenges, but also to keep them informed throughout the process about what is being done by the elected and appointed representatives, as well as what they can do themselves to help in the process. Again, it could fit under several different locations in the comprehensive report to mention something like that. And one final thing, which we chose in the subcommittee not to address, but that's the economic impacts of all this. I think that long before Kiowa gets flooded out of existence, we're going to see the impacts through a decrease in property values. As people begin to learn more and more about this around the country, as they begin to read things like the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Washington Post that are carrying these studies, and of which there's 4 or 5 of these now published, prices of coastal real estate is staying flat or declining in many areas of the country. This is an editorial out of the Post and Courier last summer. I think the answer to all this is that Kiowa commits itself to recognizing the situation and to working strongly to become the most sea level rise ready community, resort community on the East Coast. If people want to live on the beach, this is the place they should live because we're the ones that are best prepared to meet the challenges ahead. That's an economic strategy that you might want to consider for the economic development section. But just embracing sea level rise and doing something about it should be a priority. And finally, to conclude, comprehensive plan probably should have a general statement that embraces this challenge with a commitment to apply thinking about consideration of sea level rise comprehensively to many of the town actions. Again, a checkbox of something to consider before moving on. It needs to recognize the threat of sea level rise, anticipate the impacts of sea level rise in many different ways it can impact us, and then plan for how to accommodate sea level rise, learn to live with it, and also to mitigate some of the impacts of it. And finally then, to invest in how to go about implementing those plans. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Appreciate it. Any questions right now?
John, a couple of questions if I might. The plan recognizes, or at least the summary, executive summary of your committee work, recognizes both drought and intense rainfall events are projected to become more frequent, and then the number of hurricanes should not increase. In terms of the recommendations, did any of those consider anything other than sea level rise, such as the hurricane threat or the storm threat?
Yes, the report itself is looking at flooding as the primary issue. I skipped over one of those slides that I had planned to talk about in here, but we have flooding coming from different causes. One is heavy precipitation, like the 2015 rainfall event. Another is tidal flooding, sometimes called nuisance flooding, a sunny day flooding, blue sky flooding, which usually occurs on the king tide, when the tides are just unusually high and comes ashore. And the third is storm surge. So yeah, throughout the report, we looked at all 3 of those influences on flooding. And then sea level rise, which is a longer term effect. Those are all immediate impact effects. The long-term effect of sea level rise just exacerbates those 3. All of those might occur singly or they might occur together. And then on top of that, sea level rise. Storm surge and tidal flooding You just start from a higher baseline as sea level rises. Precipitation, the water is higher, so there's less time for water to drain out of the pond system and the outfalls to move off of the island. So all those get worse as time goes on with sea level rise.
The other point you made is the need and the potential risk being more serious, if you will, on the marshes and the marsh levels. One point that is made in here is that the town should do something with respect to the marshes. The marshes are not the town is not responsible for the marshes under the present structure.
Right.
It is for the beach, but not the marshes.
That's right. No one is at present responsible for marshes. We recommend the town because the marsh, you're going to have to interact with OCRM. There's a critical line on the marshes. Anything you do in moving out into the marshes or the setback from the marsh, you're going to have to work with other state entities. And the town, since it already does that on the beach, already has the experience working in beach management, would be the most logical entity, the committee felt, to take on that responsibility.
Okay, and the last question is related to, again, the whole question of sea level rise. And I assume some of the consideration for the conclusions and the information in the report dealt with, obviously, the recognition of the glacial melt and whatever, given rise to sea level rise, but also did it include any consideration of the movement of the earth?
In what way would the earth, are you talking about?
In terms of referred to vertical land motion?
Oh, subsidence. You're talking about subsidence? Yes. And like Bob Cheney, who was on the committee, and it was the chief NOAA, head of NOAA satellite imagery for measuring sea level rise by satellite when he worked for NOAA. He looked into that a good bit, got some numbers for subsidence in the Charleston area. There is some, it's fairly minor, and so so we didn't go much farther with it. Yeah, but yeah, there is some subsidence. Now, the figures that are in the handouts I gave you here of 1.5 to 2.5 feet of sea level rise in 30 to 50 years, which I'm suggesting you'd better raise that to 2 to 3 feet, which Folly Beach has adopted originally, and the city of Charleston has now changed from 1.5 to 2.5 feet to adopt 2 to 3. Those are still kind of global mean sea level rises. The southeast coast of the U.S. is rising at a faster rate than that. And there's several different reasons that are thought for that to be happening, which we could go into if you want to get into that more technically.
With the task force.
So, you know, I think we all feel pretty confident that those are not bad numbers to go by. If anything, they would be upward from that.
Okay, I'm sorry, there is one last question, and that really relates to the whole issue of the comprehensive plan amendments. And the way the comprehensive plan is structured by law is we have a series of needs identified in each one of the areas, topical areas required, and then a series of goals. Your recommendations, or at least 144 or whatever number, seem to be more specific steps than an expression of a goal. Are you suggesting we change the law?
In this presentation, rather than go into all the specific recommendations, I try to sort of summarize some of those recommendations as I was trying to show the relationship between some of those and how they might go into the plan. For instance, if you want to talk about salt marshes, I think a detailed mapping could locate some areas which are susceptible to erosion with something like a living shoreline would be an appropriate response, but only limited areas like that. Well, that's probably not what you want to put in the comprehensive plan. However, a strategy for dealing with loss of marshes might be something that would go into the comprehensive plan.
As a goal,
As a goal,
but not as a specific step.
right.
So the example of Folly Beach adopting 3 to 4, 4 to 2 to 4, whatever they had, would be a specific recommendation as opposed
That
to
was,
those?
that's for background information. That beginning part about the scenarios and what causes flooding, the elevations, is all just some background information that I was trying to provide, so that as you're considering these recommendations and how to generalize those for the comprehensive plan, you had that kind of understanding of it.
But you're not recommending that the comprehensive plan be specific
I
to
don't think
adopt
so.
a certain level?
I don't think it necessarily needs to be.
Okay.
I don't know, because that's your domain of understanding and not mine. We'll be happy to talk about things and try to answer more questions, but, your group, the task force, has to decide what they want to put in the comprehensive plan.
Gotcha.
Good.
Thank
Anyone else at this time? We do have, as I mentioned, the subcommittee that's gonna begin working on recommendations for the comprehensive plan. Thanks, John.
Thank you
Appreciate
very
it.
much.
Thank you.
Great.
The next item of new business has a hint of old business to it, but we're going to hear a new subdivision application for Beachwalker East. John, if you want to kick it off, and then we'll hear from the applicant.
The application before you is a preliminary subdivision plat that is in the Beachwalker East area. This particular application is requesting the connection to Dudenside or disconnection at Beachwalker Drive and via Cape Point. The actual subdivision plat, there are no substantive changes on the actual physical plat itself from what you have seen from last month. There are some added materials that are in your possession that supports exhibits that reference safety improvements from specific and concerns raised from from the concerns raised from community members regarding safety. And so staff has prepared, reviewed the application, and it meets the criteria and still retains the two sort of considerations from the existing MOU in place between the applicant and the community association. And that is an MOU between, like I said, the applicant and the community association that has specific development standards that impact parcel 13. As you recall, the traffic study was completed in this area that did produce 2 general findings. And since that February meeting, the applicant has provided some exhibits that highlight specifically safety plan for Dudenside Road. And so what I'll do briefly is go through the exhibits that are in your possession and allow the applicant to go more in detail of what those exhibits represent from an intent standpoint. The cost projection that was prepared solicits approximately $170,000 worth of improvements. That would be split between the 2 entities, the applicant and the community association. And since then, also in the second MOU has been executed, where funds will be dispersed from the applicant to the community association within 10 days from the approval of a preliminary plat. And the implementation of the proposed improvement projects that were all sort of derived from the conversations had with the applicant and with the applicant and residents of the area, following the recommendations of the traffic study that was completed. Those will be implemented or managed essentially by the community association. That language is in the MOU, and then also the applicant has noted in the MOU that easements in the area that created a challenge for location of trails or safety patterns would be granted to the community association as needed. Within this supplemental materials, also a project scope timeline that shares that April 2020, a year from approximately where we are now before the peak season, that these projected safety improvements would be made. And additionally, approximately over 20 public comments were received in your possession, and so you have a copy of those materials. And so this is the MOU that you have reviewed, and as well as the specific cost projections outlined. And if there are any questions specifically on any of those materials, that's all as far as the actual application that, like I said, it's been completed, and staff still retains the considerations for adding in language from the original or the first memorandum of understanding to the plat that would derive some of those development standards that would impact future development in the area that has been executed through that MOU. Any question?
I don't think so. The applicant has a presentation to make.
Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission, and those attendees, my name is Mark Primar. Along with Ray Pantlake and Jordan Phillips, we're here representing the applicant for the preliminary plat. And it's good to be back with everyone. We're in a position to turn in our homework of what we believe we were asked, questions of which that we couldn't provide clarity and proper definition in terms of form, commitment, and a variety of other things of several particular areas that commission members raised, as well as members of the property owners in the affected area. And in general, those are scope, estimate of implementation, that is the cost attributed to the implementation, the source of funds, who would be responsible for project management and implementation, and most critical, how soon, what is the target date. I have brought along the slideshow that we used as the last basis for our presentation of the form and the analysis and assessment that we had done that led us to a proposed implementation plan, but these were question areas that I could not honestly answer in terms of clarity. So what I'd like to do, if it's all right, is just to focus on 4 slides that I've added to this slideshow. And as I think Stephanie pointed out, this slideshow in its entirety was submitted to the town last Friday, and I think has been posted so others can have access to it. Ray, if I could ask you to maybe hand out, the handout that I have are hard copies of the 4 key slides that I'd like to focus on. And while Ray's doing that, I'm going to get to those slides. Let's see. The first slide is a slide similar to the one that we presented at the last Planning Commission meeting to give you some context of a particular area of focus in the much larger area. Both of these areas are outside the plat proper, but are critical to a fair assessment of what future development might be in that area, as well as impact on existing development. So this diagram is representing on the left side the existing conditions with some enumerations there of the, if you remember, Mr. Chairman, we outlined a working committee of people on our team and representatives of Greens Lake, Sparrow Pond, Duneside 1, and Duneside 2 owners. And the effort there was to have a working session in which we could combine our sort of intellectual resources of planning and living in those areas to identify potential areas of improvement to safety as a result of the Kimley-Horn report. We use that as well as our own expertise and our own muscle memory of living in that area. So this diagram sort of translates that enumerated list on the left there of particular areas that might be considered for areas of improvement for safety for people walking or biking in this particular area. We learned from the Kimley-Horn report that traffic proper is really not of concern in terms of the capacity of the roads to handle it at an acceptable level of service. But that's not the full story. In our resort communities, people walking around and biking is as important, is as critical as anything. So we want to be sensitive to that. And I'm going to outline a couple of things on the new diagrams next. But I just wanted to use this as a reference because it's sort of in the epicenter of area of concern. So let me work my way slowly to... All right, now, this part is a little difficult to follow, slide 13, which is the beginning of our homework. This diagram is extremely critical to developing a proper estimate of what the improvements should be in particular areas. What Ray Pantlick did was to assemble all the plats of record in this area, which is sort of like an archaeological dig because this is the first area of modern-day Kiowa. Sparrow Pond was the very first offering of real estate in 1976. And we might even have some owners that were part of that first release. But we assembled all of the plats of record for Greens Lake, Sparrow Pond, Duneside 1 and 2, beach townhouses, the whole area in there. And the reason that's important is it begins to develop a strong base that's dimensional, that is key dimensions that we can have takeoffs for estimates. And it also outlines particular areas of where you are allowed to have trails and where there's no trail easement. So the diagram represents a couple of different layers. First of all, we established where the easements are of record. And there are some in there, but they aren't all connected. Then we layered the actual trails. So when you walk around in that particular area, we layered on the trails where they match up with pedestrian easements and are comfortably settled in from a legal perspective and where they aren't. So for example, let me see if I can use this. In these areas, there are easements of record. So for example, in this portion of Sparrow Pond up in here, along the northern side, that's actually the physical part of Sparrow Pond, the real pond, along in there, and there are easements in here. There's actually an odd easement out in the water of Sparrow Pond behind this array of cottages in that location. There is no trail there, but there's at least a pedestrian easement. And then there are other areas, such as this trail connection, how people in Inlet Cove will go to the beach right now. They cross over here, take this trail, come down to this area, and pass through Duneside Villas. Well, in that zone, there is no easement of record, as well as a couple other locations like that. But that's part of a document known as the 99-year lease with the Community Association. And in the 99-year lease, that's an assemblage of documents that are graphic that show the master lagoon system that our community association manages and takes care of, as well as leisure trails. This would be an example of a leisure trail that everyone has used for, I mean, that was probably built in the late 70s, but isn't on an easement. But it is part of a commitment to the community of maintaining that trail. And then you have new easements, such as the area between Timbers and Duneside 2 in that location. That's a new easement of record to allow for what I'm going to describe in a short while. Now, the reason this is important is as we improve the system, where are the weak links? Where can we add easements where it's appropriate, or as a minimum, codify this 99-year lease arrangement? The next slide, which is 14, is now we're starting to layer new information on top of the previous base. So the color coding is representing some dramatic changes that our working group, as a group, suggested should be considered for improvements in the area. The most notable one is to remove an existing trail along the east side of the Sparrow Pond Greens Lake Cottage, right in there, that hugs Duneside Road. It presently provides access to the entry to the pool area, but in general, aside from the muscle memory of people walking in that area, it's not a safe condition. So what we're proposing as a group is to demolish that, and prior to the demolition of that, establish a new trail in a new 20-foot wide pedestrian easement on parcel 13 on the western side of the pool that will do multiple things. First of all, it gets people out of harm's way along the road, and it also connects with the whole flow pattern of Inlet Cove going to the beach, people in Sparrow Pond going to the beach, as well as entering the pool area from the northern side as opposed to the roadside. And then people in this area and people in a future developed area of parcel 13, how they would go to Freshfields if they went up this trail on up to Freshfields or on to the resort. So that would be an example of demolition in one area, but prior to that demolition, establish a clear, more contemporary 8-foot wide path as opposed to a 4 or 5 foot wide path in an area that allows for people to get out of a particular area. In that area at the same time, along Duneside Road in this section, we have bike parking in that section right in there. We have 5 stanchions, 9 each, so we have 45 parking spaces right there, which meets a need, but it's in a generally unsafe area. So when people are sort of pulling bikes in and out, it's easy to get to the edge of the road as a minimum, or worse, sort of bump out into the road while you're sort of organizing your bike patterns with kids and everything else. So we're going to place that bike parking in an area in this 20-foot easement off the street. And we're proposing, as a part of this improvement plan, instead of 45, we could have initially 80, and using units that allow for optimizing how bikes park more efficiently in a particular area. In other areas, we're proposing select improvements to existing trails. This trail along Sparrow Pond right in here is critical to a flow pattern for everyone in this area flowing to the pool area as well as the beach. There are portions of that trail that are covered over. They can be improved in terms of both the stability of the path as well as widen where it's appropriate. And I've been asked by this working group to approach Roger Warren to see if we can encourage him to establish a trail right in here that feeds right into the master trail system of the core area of the hotel. For those of you that are familiar with the construction that's going on in that area where the pond is being constructed in this area, there's a causeway that will be in that location. It's a perfect location to connect to the master trail system. The final act that's listed here before I go to the master list is 1, 2, 3, 4. There are 4 locations that we're proposing raised table crosswalks. If you remember the gentleman from Kimley Horn identifying a particular way of safe travel across a road when you're combining trail locations on both sides, we think those are not only appropriate locations, but they also slow traffic down. So we're going to integrate the raised table, and each one of these will be subtly customized to the drainage issues in those locations. We have engineering funds that's established to particularize how they shape into those locations. But each one would have a stop sign. So it's not just a raised table, but you'd also have a stop sign. It helps calm traffic down on a variety of locations. Let me continue on to this slide, slide 15, which is the last graphic slide, is essentially exactly the same information. It's just highlighting areas that are the new additions to the system. as opposed to all the existing trails that we're going to go foot by foot and discover where we can enhance and improve the trails that are existing. So these particular areas are critical to us in terms of identifying those early, because you're going to hear me later on talk about schedule, where we can use the season period to develop all the plans for that, identify contractors to implement it, and Jimmy and his team are excellent at this type of improvement strategy in terms of improvements in our community, and they're going to be taking the lead. So, but we can use this time, and Jordan has suggested that Ray, and this is a top priority for the partners, so Ray and I are available to Jimmy and his team as he sees fit to sort of figure out things together in this particular area. All right, I somewhat buried the lead. This is the last slide. So if we could focus on this, if I could go through the homework turn-in part to the commission as well as to the community. Scope. What we have tried to do here as a group, our working group, is to identify in that listing right there the core scope, some of which I've described to you, some of it's technical in nature. So for example, you see surveying, engineering, demolition, that's the business of construction and so forth. But we tried to outline all those particular areas. Then we also identified additional scope items that are either as a result of those improvements or available for enhancement. So for example, the first category is selective landscape enhancement. We don't know where they are, but we'd like to have a resource available to heal particular areas that are demolished. So that area along the east side of the pool area, when that trail is removed, we should supplement the landscaping that the community has put in that area over the past couple of years. The additional item under additional scope is the relocation of the gates to enter the pool area to the north. And the owner representative of the cottage suggests an additional entrance on the western side, because people going back and forth from the pool, mostly the restroom and the beach, there's an easier way. There are things like, and the relocation of the shower associated with it, and some waste cans. It's all related and all woven together to present a better picture going forward. The source of funds was always represented, or is already represented by John, is a 50-50 combination of resources by KICA, which I didn't point out through the memorandum of understanding, has taken the lead on behalf of the community of the nearly 4,400 property owners to negotiate downward density limits of access, how construction is handled on parcel 13, a whole array of things that we went through with you before. Those are all the same. But they're also providing project management, and to the extent that they see value in us being a resource, we're ready as Jimmy sees fit to accomplish that. I'm thinking that is our homework turn in. I remembered one thing that the chairman in particular had asked several times that I would like to point out. There was a question that the chairman raised several times of, all right, we see how Greens Lake people get into the system and get down to the beach. We see how this area of Sparrow Pond also gets down and into the beach. This eastern section, all of these people have a comfortable way and a safe way to cross over here, get to the beach. We've already accounted for Duneside Villas. But what about this? And I can't remember the names of the courts there. I apologize to those property owners in this area. In this area, there was a strong recommendation by us about a year ago, and then by Kimley Horn, that there should be a trail that hugs the roadside right in there. But there was a really good determination by the property owner representative that we supported this idea of, all right, there are other ways that we can accommodate safe passage in that area without taking out a lot of trees, putting an 8-foot trail in there that hugs right up against those cottages. There's some cottages that are very close to the road there. So what we've integrated within our scope and estimate is painting, you know how you see in urban areas painted walkways or bikeways or whatever. So we've devised a way to integrate that in that specific area and call it out with signage in that particular area. So I think I'll just shut it down right now. I probably described too much in an effort to share with you the work of our entire group. The final act is, when would this be done? This was pointed out by John. Our approach as a team is to use the season as the time period to refine with exacting terms, drawings, survey work, that we need permission to go on other people's property to do survey work, really refine drawings and documents, get those priced again with refinement, identify suitable contractors or providers for that service, get them all lined up, and when the whistle blows during the off-season in the fall, release the hounds in terms of the improvement so that we can have substantial efforts shown up this calendar year with a target of no later than April of 2020 having all of this accomplished. That's our goal. And, well, it's not a goal, it's the objective to accomplish that. So I'll shut down. Sorry.
Any comments by commissioners or questions of?
I'd like to repeat a question I asked Mark last time, and since it didn't appear in the minutes, maybe we'll get you on the record this time. The traffic study suggested paths or walkways. You've substituted basically different paths or walkways or trails in a different form, but throughout the affected area. Are you satisfied that the substitution and the current recommendation satisfies the safety needs that otherwise would have been covered by the paths that were recommended?
We do. First and foremost, we do believe that it meets the clear safety goal. But we are trying to do it in particular areas where it also balances our vision for Kiowa, which is the retention of the natural conditions for trees in particular area and a variety of other things. We try to balance those with the clear priority given to safety. So for example, that last effort on my part to remember about, there's one section where we're not putting in a classic trail, but we're using a different technique to call out passageway and safety. It's in deference to saving trees in that particular area. So the short answer is absolutely, we believe that this represents a program of, Commissioner Ewan, and I'm going to kill the phrase, but he said, we don't want it just to be safer, we want it to be safe. And so that, it was our goal. Our goal is to provide safe conditions in that particular area. So the answer is yes, we believe we do.
Mark, just one other question, and that relates to the project itself and the scope. You seem to indicate that the intention, developer's intention, is to have outside contractors complete the work within the time frame that you laid out. Is that an understanding with KICA as well, do you know?
Jimmy's here to address that, but yes, that is our intent, is to identify those sources during the season period that align with what we shared with you today and support KIC and their effort to manage those sources.
But the work would be...
Now, fortunately, we have a lot of experience relative to trails, signage. We have a new signage system that we can integrate properly, but trails and trail maintenance, new trail conditions, new ways of getting to the beach. We have a lot of good experience in the community professionally, so we're going to draw upon that.
Okay, so again, the work will be done by an outside contractor that both you and
That's correct.
KICA agreed with.
Right.
You mentioned stop signs, you didn't mention speed signs. Are they also integrated in the wayfinding?
That would be part, yeah, I didn't call those out specifically,
Right.
But interestingly enough, if you were to drive around West Beach, there are 2 speed signs. They're around the roundabout, and there are no other speed signs. There was a question raised by one of the board members of the Cottage Owners Association in a correspondence to you about that, and that's our intent to integrate that. So this might be a role model for possible consideration on the eastern side of West Beach, where you go toward the Sandcastle. There might be some, for example, like the raised panel, there are a couple locations that might be considered in that, as well as speed limit signs. But I'm not here saying what the speed limit should
No,
be.
I'm not suggesting you are, but.
Right, yeah. It's
Signage
right
would
now,
be-
there are two 15-mile-per-hour speed limit signs where you approach the roundabout. And that suggests then it's 15 miles per hour throughout in terms of how speed signs work. My intuition, well, I didn't stay at a Holiday Inn Express last night, all right? So my intuition, it should be less than that, if for no other reason to call it out. I don't know if some of you remember, but the original speed limit signs on Kiowa were odd numbers.
Yes.
To some of you, so they were like 17 and 22, and
Made you think.
people were totally puzzled. But what you found was people drove 22 miles an hour. I mean, they went, oh, this is serious. So I'm not suggesting that, but I think it should be reflective of the condition in that position.
Mark, last month, I remember you showed a speed table on Beachwalker for the path that crosses from Inlet Cove to join to the Sparrow Pond Trail. Is that been deleted?
I did have it on an earlier drawing. That's in the town right-of-way.
Mm-hmm.
And, I think that's sort of outside our realm.
Okay.
So I think that is a town consideration. I don't want to represent it one way or the other, because there are locations where speed tables are inappropriate, and there are other ways to call out, crossovers and that are actually more effective. So that's, is that fair? Yeah. So I removed that because that was a reach.
Okay.
But the number of speed tables and the locations will be part of that review that you'll go through.
Right. We have
during this
accounted on our estimates for 4.
Right.
The next level, as I mentioned, because it was called out by, again, one of the board members of the cottage associations, of, well, how are the drainage issues? We don't want to adversely impact the drain. So each one of those will be somewhat custom crafted with topo conditions, and how does it relate to the drainage patterns and so forth. But we call out 4 on those in the areas that I cited.
Right.
I think Jimmy Bailey wants to speak here briefly.
Do you want something else, Jim? Okay.
Maybe a little awkward to ask Mark to yield his time, but I'm here on behalf of Kika and Charlestonians in the room. I suspect Ross and Dwayne, I don't know if others will understand when I say that Miss Whipple's graduation is waiting for me. So I want to make sure that if the Planning Commission has any questions for Kika as it relates to this, that you have an opportunity to ask them before I have to step out.
Jim, my only question was really just directed to Mark, but he answered, I think, on your behalf, but do you agree with him?
I think that the timeline is reasonable, and I will also add that when the Thomas and Hutton scope was developed, we asked our in-house engineers that do this type of thing all the time to look at the estimates of the unit counts and the asphalt price and so forth, and they independently confirmed that they felt like it was a reasonable estimate.
And you're also in agreement that the work will be done by an outside contractor?
Oh, certainly the actual construction, yes.
Okay.
I guess I would just ask, do you feel there are any agreements in addition to what has been agreed to between you and Kiowa Partners to affect this safety improvement?
Do I feel there are any?
I mean, is your Kika board on board? Are you ready to go with this project?
We're ready to go.
Okay.
Yeah, the most recent document that you received was intended to to provide some clarity around the funding issues. That was approved by our board.
Okay, thank you.
And as far as you're concerned, Kika has the same high priority on the project that the developers do?
Certainly, if depending on what you do with this, if you approve it, our goal would be to get into the detailed planning work almost immediately.
Any other questions for Jimmy or comments?
Thank you.
Thanks, Bill. Any other questions or comments from Mark at this time?
No, I think he's doing his homework.
Yeah, I think so. I guess I would entertain a motion to approve this. One item that concerns me is the actual opening of the roadway, that this not occur prior to the total completion of all the safety improvements. And I think we need to condition any approval, if we so approve, on that the bollards that separate Duneside Road and Southern Pines not be removed until such time as every little bit of the safety improvements have been done. And then if in fact they are not done, that we would then deny final plat approval until such time as they are done. I think it's incumbent on us, since we believe in the safety issue, and that's what we based our denial last month on, that the safety issue gets addressed 100%, not any, well, we're going to do that a little bit later. So I don't know how other people feel about that, but it strikes me that that needs to be done, and I realize there's the whole chicken and egg of building a cul-de-sac at the end of Southern Pines and disconnecting from Cape Point and Beachwalker and the opening. And, I don't know exactly how that's going to flow, but I do not want to see it happen until all 100% of the safety improvements have been done. I don't know how everybody else feels about that, but that's...
Jordan, you want to comment on that?
We're willing to accept that condition.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
So I'd move to approve the preliminary plat conditioned on the completion of all the safety improvements prior to the connection of Duneside and the other road.
Let's second that.
Okay. Bill beat you to it, I think. That's okay. You can third it. Are there any other comments or questions, discussion by commission members?
I think so.
Well, then I'll call for a vote on the motion with the condition that the final connection and decoupling cannot occur until all the safety improvements indicated hereon are done. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Thank you very much. The next item on the agenda is correspondence staff comments. Do we have any of that? John?
Just one briefly, I think many of you attended our last workshop session for continuing ed credits. There may be one more available at the end of the month, but I'll send that correspondence to you as another opportunity comes.
Thank you. Council Liaison, Mr. Prickett, any comments? Okay, thank you. Public comments. If you come to the podium, state your name and address and make your comments, and I'd ask you keep them brief and civil.
It's brief. I'm Jim Gerardo. I'm a member of the Kiowa Island Cottage Owners Association Board. I live in Sparrow Pond, 1039 Warbler Court. One of the speed tables is right across the street from my home. And I want to bring to the council's attention, to the commission's attention, that all of the pictures that show the raised crosswalks are these brick raised crosswalks, very pleasing. But in the cost slide, if you look at it, please turn to the cost slide. Number 16 shows asphalt speed tables. So that's a far cry from the speed tables that are being shown in the picture. If you want to see asphalt speed tables, go to Sam's Club in North Charleston. There's a lot of asphalt speed tables there. So I just want to make that comment and bring it to your attention. Thank you.
Diane Leader, 306 Palm Warbler. I had one question. Well, I have one question and I have two comments. In removing the parking at the end of Duneside, I didn't hear any discussion on what was going to happen to the handicap parking that had been there. And have we removed handicap access at that end of the island then? Is it possible for somebody to put aside some handicap parking for the public, either at the Timbers or as part of the new development? I would just put that out there for your consideration. I think that's a loss.
I hate to respond, but I would say that that's an issue between the Kiowa Partners and Kika.
I just wanted to make sure it was on the table.
Right, thank you.
The question was raised, one of the questions that took us from last meeting to this meeting was about the cost of improvements. And perhaps I'm reading that slide wrong, but if you go back to that slide on the costs, in very, very tiny print underneath it, it said that the costs exclude landscaping, irrigation, impactor tap fees, et cetera, et cetera. So therefore, it appears that the $169,000 is only a partial estimate of the costs, and the question of what the total costs are remains unanswered. And I think the reason that that came up in the first place was because the MOU discussed how sharing of $200,000 of expenses would be done, but the question of whether $200,000 was going to be adequate. And I don't think that we have that answer today. And just one further very personal comment. The MOU with Kika establishes that they would share expenses in this particular situation. I don't think I'm alone in believing that when a developer's development, not a single infill development of a lot, but when a developer's development requires substantive improvements to existing infrastructure, that should be borne by the developer and not by the public. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Cindy Weidenhouse. My husband and I own 1030 Warbler Court in Sparrow Pond. So one of those asphalt crosswalks comes right in front of our property or right next to our property. So I too am concerned with the appearance of that. And if we want, if we're trying to encourage people to use them as a crosswalk, maybe we should make them look like a crosswalk. So if you notice the ones coming around the circle to where the new resort's going to be, those are all gonna look great. They're bricked, they look very pretty. And it would just be sort of in keeping with that theme to make them all aesthetically pleasing and not a big bump of asphalt. Thanks.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Ross Appel. I'm an attorney here on behalf of the Duneside 2 regime. We have been at this for over a year. We have come a long way. While I think everybody may, in their ideal world, prefer something different than what has been approved this afternoon, I think that we've come a long way, and I think that what was approved this afternoon is a far improvement from what was before us and what we were facing a year ago. And I want to thank the planning commissioners, I want to thank the staff, I want to thank the partners, I want to thank everybody involved in this process for that, on behalf of my regime. We still have some concerns, especially regarding the sort of commercial traffic that's associated with serving a development like the Timbers and like some of the other developments that may be on the way. I'm talking about, you know, linen trucks, Cisco food, 18-wheelers, things of that nature. And I just encourage the town, the partners, to continue working on reasonable means to address those sorts of concerns as this process continues. And then finally, I'd like to express support for staff's recommendation to, prior to final plat approval, that is, include some notations on the plat, essentially tying up all the loose ends regarding the first MOU, the second MOU, the restrictive covenants that were contemplated by the first MOU, just to make sure that everything that we've worked on over the last year is not forgotten 3, 5, 10, 20 years from now. I think there's been a lot of great work, and it would be our hope and expectation that that information is memorialized in a way where anybody that pulls the final plat during their due diligence down the road will understand that there's development restrictions that are imposed by the MOU that were not part of the development agreement. And I just think that it could avoid a lot of problems and miscommunications down the road. So with that, I will go sit down, but I appreciate everybody's time this afternoon. Thank you,
sir.
Hi.
Hello.
My name is Joanne Ruggieri. I'm on 1065 Galliano Court, and I keep looking at this and thinking I'm looking at the wrong thing. There doesn't seem to be any safe pathway for people on our streets to get to the beach or to get out on the street. There's no pedestrian parkway at all in that area. How are we to safely manage getting around in those areas? My husband's in an electric wheelchair. There's another individual in an electric wheelchair on the street next to ours, and there's another individual in a wheelchair. How do we safely get around these areas? No way. Okay. Okay, thank you very much. We'll
Thank you,
just
ma'am.
address it to our attorney. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Joan Collar. I live on Sanderling Court. I'm just concerned about, I know you're going to split the expenses on all the improvements, but it seems to me there should be some money that the partners put into escrow to take care of unexpected improvements on what you have done, because nothing works out perfect the first time. And it seems that all that burden will be on Kika rather than split. So I would like to see that an escrow account be set up.
Wendy Kulik, 38 Marsh Edge Lane. I just wanted to underscore one of the comments that Diane made, and that is, first, before I do that, first of all, thank you to the commission very much for all the things you've taken into consideration, and especially the safety issues. I think that's critical. The comment that Diane made about Kika and property owners not bearing any costs, I just want to reiterate that. This is by the developer for the developer, and the developer should shoulder any of these costs. Thank you.
Sure, you're a member of the public. Just take all your other hats off. And
I don't know how many hats I wear, but Mark Primar again. So what I'd like to do is address a couple of really good questions and suggestions that were brought up, because they have been points of consideration. The one about the aesthetic of the crosswalks the point is absolutely well taken. In fact, we're looking at having a salt finish concrete, if you know what that is. That's a pretty refined sort of finish on that would be considered for the top portion. The tapering off would be asphalt, probably, right? In terms of how it feathers into the asphalt. But the actual tabletop would be called out with salt finish concrete. And I can send some pictures to the Planning Commission or send them to John to post, because it's a really nice way to handle a condition like that. First of all, it's light. It calls out for, not only for the pedestrian, but for a driver coming forward. They call it out. Our concern about brick is less about cost and more about brick moves. It as we know, right, in terms of some conditions. But the salt finish concrete is one way to address the aesthetic. Let's see, bear with me here. The handicap parking area, or more equally important, a drop area. We know we have an unsafe condition with the parking that has evolved over time in that location. And there is a set-aside area for a handicapped area. What was brought up to us by property owners in that area is it's also a logical place for people that are filling their Suburbans and so forth with beach stuff. They need a place to unload it, to go to the beach, so forth. So I've been asked to take a look at how we can integrate that aspect into, I don't have a solution right now, but that is a good call out that we're looking at too. Come on, the idea of codifying the various restrictive covenants, the ones that would be assigned to the plat proper would be worthy of considering in a conditional or final plat. The ones that are outside, geographically outside the plat, we can't really do that other than formalize the agreements that we already have in place. So I don't know if that's the type of thing, but for example, the MOU, there were things that were directly attributed to the plat proper, okay? And then the final one, which is, I don't know how to address this. The reference to the developer should pay for everything. Let me just state it that way, all right? That is totally understandable, with one exception, is if there was anything that we learned together, certainly through the Kimley-Horn report, is we have a difficult situation now. We have an existing condition now that warrants, independent of any future development, it warrants improvement. And so I do, with my property owner hat on, I'm a property owner too, I do think the contribution by the community association in this context versus a greenfield context where it's undeveloped land out in a remote location, that isn't appropriate to ask the community to pay in on improvements in it. This is a different context. This is a context which is actually outside our gates is more normal in the rest of the world. I mean, where there's development within an established area. So I think it's worthy of the approach that we're using today, that it's a communal effort to improve existing conditions, and the contribution of the developer is about the add-on, the future conditions. So I think I addressed most of those.
Thank you, Mark. Sir, there's somebody at the podium.
Virginia Abbott, 4304 Seaforest Drive. I have to comment, if the brick issue is so major, how come the resort is able to do brick crosswalks? That's all I'd say in terms of these people wanting a decent looking crosswalk. But the other thought that I had with all this discussion about whether the developer's paying or KICA is paying, could we at least have an escrow account for any overage that the developers agree that they will pay for any overage beyond the $100,000 that KICA is kicking in? Just a thought.
Generally, you aren't allowed 2 bites at the apple.
Okay, well, thank you for allowing it. The comment that they are fixing an existing problem that we have. I've been going to Sparrow Pond for over 25 years. It's a walking, biking community. In all the years that I've been there, Mark said it himself, 1976 it was built. I don't ever recall a problem or an accident there that would say we have a safety problem today. The safety problem is caused by opening up the road and allowing 170 more units access to that road with tractor trailers, Cisco tractor trailer, bringing in food to Timbers, the linen trucks that are coming in. That's creating the problem. I had a homeowner this morning taking a dead tree down, and Arbor Care was doing that work, and they parked a flatbed along my home so they could take off their equipment and do the work. If the Cisco truck then had to go down Duneside Road, especially with this painted area that's going to allow bikers and walk that Mark alluded to, that Cisco tractor trailer would not be able to get down Duneside Road. And then I won't say anything else except thank you. I think the Planning Commission has given us an outlet to voice our opinion, which we haven't been able to do from the start of this a year ago. So I'd like to thank the Planning Commission for that. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Commissioner comments. We'll start with you, John, if you have any.
Nope, I'm still a rookie here.
Okay, thank you. Gail?
I just want to thank the community for your input. It's been very helpful. And I wish everyone good luck, and thank you.
Thanks. Britt?
You know, I agree with the attorney from the Duneside regime. We have come a long way. Mark's done a lot of homework. The partners have done a lot of homework, and the community comments have been invaluable. So I think we've hopefully solved an existing situation and made it better for a lot of people in this area.
Thanks. Andy?
Just a brief comment on the cooperation I think we received not only from the developer but also from KICA in dealing with the issue that did exist. And I'm not going to get into a debate of whether it's new or it existed. One thing I think we have to realize is the Duneside Sparrow Pond community for years, basically, has enjoyed some independence, if you will, of area that no one else on the island enjoys. The entire island is private, but the roads are all used by the people on the island, throughout the island. Not to say that it's overused or to say it's underused, but to say it's used. And it's available to everybody. And I don't see any reason that Duneside or any of the other roads, as long as they're in a safe, passable condition, can't be used by everybody as well.
Thanks, Andy. I would entertain a motion for adjournment. Oh, Bill, I'm sorry. Bill, any comments?
Well, all right. I'd like to thank Mark Kumar for his consistence in not only listening, but always trying to seek out a better solution to this safety issue. So hats off to Mark for that. And that's my only comment.
Thank you, Bill. Now I'll entertain a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
And seconded?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.